We already know that colons can be used to introduce lists, and that commas are used to separate items in a list. But what if the items in the list contain commas? How would we make sure our list was still clear and still made sense? Well, this is one of the uses of semicolons. Take this list of children in a class as an example. Sally, who's always reading her book. Ben. Beth, who always has a hat, whatever the weather. And Paul. If we wanted to write this as a sentence, we would normally write it like this, placing a comma between each item, but using the conjunction and before the final item. In my class I have 4 children. Sally, who's always reading her book. Ben, Beth, who wears a hat whatever the weather, and Paul. The problem is though, the commas make the list slightly confusing. It's not clear where I'm using commas between items in a list and where I'm using commas within an item in the list. In this situation, we're better off changing the commas that are used between items in a list for semicolons. We'll also add one here before the final and. This helps make it really clear that we have 4 items in our list, with each item coming before or after a semicolon. In my class I have 4 children. Sally, who's always reading her book. Ben, Beth, who wears a hat whatever the weather, and Paul. Perfect. So unlike normal commas in lists, semicolons are used between each item in the list, even the last 2. We only ever use semicolons to separate items in a list if one or more of the items in the list contains a comma. Take a look at this weekly planner, which is showing the after-school clubs that Ben sometimes takes part in. Let's see if we can write this as a sentence, listing the clubs and their respective days. We'll start by writing the individual items from the list. We've got football or tennis, which are both on a Monday, art, which is always on a Thursday, and dance, which is his favourite, on a Friday. Notice how these items each contain a comma, so we can't use a comma to link the items in a list. We'll have to use a semicolon. Let's start to put the sentence together. Ben takes part in lots of after-school clubs. Football or tennis, which are both on a Monday, art, which is always on a Thursday, and dance, which is his favourite, on a Friday. Perfect. It's really clear that there are 3 items in the list, and it's still clear how the commas have been used within the items in the list. So, just like commas, semicolons can be used between items in a list. We only use semicolons if one or more of the items in the list already contains a comma. If we're using semicolons in a list, we put them between every item, even the last 2, where we'll use a semicolon followed by the word and.